The extraction that has happened for our resources has happened from stolen lands. It has become stolen wealth.
The big message that's screaming at me is First Nations-led decision-making in seeing climate justice is critical. Hello and welcome to Community Conversations, the podcast from Closing the Gaps. At Closing the Gaps, we often say that it's more than a tea, it's a conversation starter. And this podcast is where those conversations continue as we sit down with inspiring people from community to talk about justice, advocacy, and the stories of the movements that got us to where we are today and those shaping the future. My name is Sarah Sherry. I'm non-Indigenous and the co-founder of Closing the Gaps. Today, we're recording on Wurundjeri and Bunurong country, and I honour the traditional owners of these lands. I'm grateful for elders past and present and honour their knowledge, lived experience, and resistance. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Tishiko King. Tish is a proud Kulkalgal woman from Masig in the Torres Strait. She's a marine biologist, a community builder, and a climate justice advocate. Her work sits at the intersection of culture, community, science, and philanthropy, bringing together deep knowledge of sea country with a commitment to fighting for First Nations-led climate solutions. Tish is also the founder of the Just Futures Collab, which is the first Torres Strait Islander-led collaborative giving circle, working to shift power and resources directly into the hands of communities on the front line of the climate crisis. Coming from the Torres Strait, where climate change is already a big part of everyday reality, Tish brings a perspective that is grounded in lived experience and action. Her work challenges us to think differently about climate justice, self-determination, and how we advocate for and care for country. Tish, welcome to Community Conversations. How are you?
Oh my gosh, it's so wonderful to be here. Hello, Kappa Bailud, good morning. And what a wonderful way to sort of bring us into that space. Thank you for sharing that. It was a really wonderful reminder to myself about my love for country and just what we're all trying to do in order to protect culture in our communities.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation for quite a while because you do wear so many hats and you have all of these different experiences, lived experiences, knowledge across different areas. And I'm really excited to unpack quite a few things with you today. But first, I would love for you to kick us off by taking us to Masig for a moment, if you can, and tell us about your island home. When you close your eyes and when you think of Masig, what do you see? What do you feel? What do you hear?
I was actually thinking that on my way this morning as we really feel the wind here on today. But I think I want to ground us first by acknowledging where we are too, in my language. So kulai kina lakasa poiban, noikoi agat, nud muruzapu aimithin alaknan puka poiban. Kapu bailud mitamuka murabuai, na mabaganu, nuzanel tish, masagnu napa, kulkalgal zenedith kesnu eso. And so I, in my language, is really honoring that I too am a visitor here. So I often think about this. Today I'm wearing this beautiful pink say, and I'm just thinking, I wanted to think of the frangipanis that, when you're walking down from the airport into the township, it's like the first smell that sort of really activates your nose. And so my tiny island home, Masig, is in the shape of a teardrop. So I kind of want to give everyone like a visual aid.
Yes, please.
And my family always say that it's shaped as a teardrop because when you come to Masig, you get really sad on your way if you're returning home or back to the mainland. And so I really feel that. The island is part of the Kulkalgal Nation, which is the Central Island group. And we are a low-lying of Coral Atoll Islands. Lol, my English. And it's like, I think about like sort of your beautiful Pacific islands that you probably would have seen on the gram or through other social platforms or in images, or you've been there. I love the Torres Strait Islands and especially the Kulkalgal Nation because it's just such a really part of the world that feels that has the most transparent and blue oceans where and the shades are so different because we're on those atolls. And then our islands are made of coral, and our churches are made of coral, and it's the backdrop of it is like coconut palms that are just swaying in this wind. And right now, I think if it was down here, it was like the songs and the ancestors and the spirits really singing to us and grounding us. You'll see piles of coconuts just on the side of the road, ready to pick up and crack open and eat, or ready to be replanted so that future generations can drink the coconuts. And so, the sandy, yeah, just walking through town. I'm at the square now, and I I sort of think, which way do I go, of which side to swim on? And it's always the tide dependent. But, it's a really beautiful, tranquil, like little space that I feel so grateful and privileged to continue to learn and grow. And I mean, everyone feels like that about their country and their island home.
Tish, I feel like my heart rate just came down about 75% as I thought about walking with you through the streets of Masig from the airport, as you said, into the square. And what a joy to stand at that square. And I have had the privilege and absolute pleasure and delight and joy of getting to walk those streets of Masig with you. And for everybody that's listening today, I really hope you enjoyed that journey of walking through Masig with Tish, because it is such an incredibly beautiful space. And Tish, you mentioned that Masig is really small and it is in the shape of a teardrop. When we say small, like how many Ks from top to bottom and across to cross?
Like it's a small village that is about 200 people, give or take, school holidays when the kids are home coming back from boarding school, or families are going out for this, for the season. Like right now it's monsoonal season up there, and so there might be families just sort of still out or out on the mainland with other families. But it's it's quite small. You can walk around the whole island in in an hour, and our widest point is our beautiful airport airstrip.
Yeah.
And sorry, everyone, as I'm like giggling, and I didn't give more context. Because Sarah, you have come to Masig. It's I'm having this conversation like what it's like. But yes, apologies everyone that is tuning in.
But it's not very big, I guess, is what you're telling us.
No, not
at
very big.
Yeah.
The community is sort of really gathered together. We only have like what would a cross section main streets,
Like a
type
couple
thing.
of streets.
Yeah, absolutely. And the beautiful houses are all just tucked within the palms, and it is actually just such a dream.
It really is. Yeah. And such an incredibly special space. And Brunswick is a really long way from Masig. And Tish, as a daughter of Masig, like who grounds you and inspires the work that you do every day here?
What a really actually hard question. Because I say that because I feel so grateful to be held here on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung. I think about the elders that have, really continued to inspire me in this space, and the traditional owners around this country that continue to guide me. And I take a lot from that. Not every day I get to talk to my family. So it's always it's interesting because I'm always finding new ways for that, would you say, connection. But when I'm here and thinking about at home, I'm not going to lie, I love a FaceTime. I love a FaceTime out in public. People hate those people. I'm one of those people. And so I really try, I guess with the lessons learned from sort of COVID and sort of like communicating, I've tried to be more conscious about that. And so being able to FaceTime family up on the islands, like my Arthur Ned, who's a the community police officer, the pastor,
the taxi.
The taxi guy, our electrician. I've been calling him lately because every week he actually sends me a prayer for folks out there. the people of Zenith Kes are not only seafaring people, but we're also God-fearing people too. And so, it's a big part of our history, of colonial history, but how it's embedded into sort of our practices today. And so, that sort of faith that he sort of shares and the lessons is really grounding in the sense to know that a lot of the conversations that I'm having out here in the city and in community, I know what my responsibility is and can be a good daughter to Masig and accountable to those that I'm supporting represent or amplify. And so it's, that's really a big part. I got to shout out my mama Lala Gutchin, who's Arab Miriam woman, so based out on Darnley Island, and continues to just her way in nature, continues to just obviously know that it's okay that I'm not always on country, but the responsibilities that into stewarding and caring for culture and our communities. And then mom.
Yeah.
God bless her cotton socks.
Mama V.
Yeah, Mama V. Hey. I say my mom, but I really want to extend that to the matriarchy of the role women have in our communities and their staunch resistance and advocacy that has really shaped truly community connection and caring for everyone and respecting all people. And so, I think that's really something special. As be here from the city. I'm like at the opposite end. My mum proper is just like, aren't you cold yet? And I'm like, it's so hot up there. I hate sweat and dripping if I can't swim.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, it's good.
One of the things that when I think about Masig, and I think back to, as I said, when I had the pleasure of being able to be on Masig with you, of not very many cars, very low impact living. And when I think about, Masig and many other islands and island nations, climate change being that, as we talked about, being a huge part of reality every day for people. What are you seeing on the ground that people on the mainland may not fully understand about the impacts of climate change on your island home?
The climate impacts are being felt with every day. We're seeing these natural weather events happen faster and stronger. Every season happening more frequent, longer, where, there's devastating impacts on our, not just on country, but it's the indirect impacts that happen. Sea levels rising are happening right now in the Torres Strait Islands. And this is nothing new. And when we talk about realities, that we first saw this in the 1930s, where communities like Saibai and Boigu had been living and adapting to this for and making informed decisions about what continuing ongoing culture looks like. And we saw that through their journey to living on mainland in the Northern Peninsula area that's created the island communities Bamaga and Saisia. Right now, there's been geopolitical sort of decisions that are made that have impacted the way that resources move through our globe right now. It's impacting everyone's everyday life. Sort of hearing on the radio yesterday, farmers are struggling because, the cost of fuel is expensive for perhaps their trucking business. And in some cases, there's not even fuel there. I sort of now want to ground everyone back of actually, for a very long time, families in the islands and especially on Masig, we only get access to fuel once a week. And we can only get access to fuel once a week during a certain part of the day. The prices that people are paying, they are ridiculous. It's robbery. I agree. But for communities like mine, and I know in rural and far remote areas, the cost of diesel has been like this for such a long time, and it is our only option. These are things that, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities have been living with and adapting to every day. And I think this is where, now when we see those changes in from degradation of extraction or from sea levels rising, where really bringing that here is that we're also, those impacts are changing our island, our country. And that's where I sort of bring back to, that's where people seeing those floods and sort of the fires. It's like, because of that being exacerbated, we are just seeing those changes in country. And so it's more than, I guess, what the climate impacts are sort of doing to our environment, but actually what our environment holds of the stories and the relationships. And that becomes even more just sort of, I guess, the challenges of what we're sharing that with everyone, of that interconnectedness and that relationship.
When I think about the impacts of climate change when you live in an urbanized area, it's very easy to not be mindful about what's happening in the environment around you and disconnect and just, go, oh, that's a thing that happens over there. It doesn't happen here. I live in the city and that doesn't impact me. But when everyday life is so connected on Masig to the environment, and when so many different parts of culture and stories are connected to different times of the year and different animal migration patterns and movements and fish coming in and out of the atoll that have been impacted by climate change, it has impacted and has been impacting for a very long time, as you said, the everyday life moments of people on islands like Masig, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think that's it continues to sort of fuel, I guess, that sort of gap and inequality. And I think that's really sharing that, that's where that sort of climate justice and climate action intersection comes from then. There are just people that are feeling the impacts every day, but actually do not contribute to our nationally determined contributions in this country. And sort of, to put that simply, emissions. And, I think about how in, the stories, and we sat around the fire on the beach, on the bonfire outside of Balayeses, and he was sharing about Panipan, about how, the lightning and the story of just like the dancing. The villagers were dancing and wanted to marry the daughter off. And there was that one dancer who didn't feel so confident. And, he got bullied and he thought he was ugly, and then went into the ocean. And then, Panipan was the lightning. And every time that we see lightning in the islands, you'll always see sharks at the same time. And so I obviously did a top line of that story and did not give it justice. But I think it is, what I wanted to share is that we have it is that relationship that we have, that the sky and sea country is connected. And if we think about Western science now, our ocean and our atmosphere are a coupled system that regulates our world. And so then we are increasing emissions then into our atmosphere. It is going to have repercussions of the people and the culture and the stories that live in and with our island homes and ocean.
And especially when we think too, as you just said, Tish, of people living on the islands contribute the absolute least to the current climate crisis that we are in the last few years of a critical decade. That's really tough to reconcile with in my brain. I'm sure it's something that you struggle with as well.
It's really hard. I don't think there's really one word or one emotion to really describe it, because the layers, when we sort of step back a little bit, there are just so many layers to this crisis. We now sort of grapple with the responsibility of a polycrisis, that while we continue to move with the mana, the spirit and love in our hearts and our ways and laws and practices, to continue to sort of bring people on this journey to understand, especially when we walk on the shoulders of giants and honor those footprints before us. It's really layered into that. I think since 2020, I think I've cried from every day to every week, but that's still a lot. I mean, I'm not the first one to have this conversation with you. This is not the first conversation you've probably had with so many deadly blackfellas across this nation or in your community. That weight of responsibility was something that I inherited, at such a young age. While I was sort of still m- moving gently through the of lessons of country and life. Responsibility was a part of those lessons, but I didn't realize that when I had to sort of step up, really was equipped to knowing that. And it's through being in solidarity with other, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, Pacific Island, Maori people, and stood shoulder to shoulder, and allies for that matter, in this space of just really understanding we have to keep doing this to ensure that future generations and have more just and fairer futures. That the decisions that we make, we're not laggard, and we actually have will and courage. And I know that this has always been done in through with mob and through island communities. But it's something that is really tears my heart up, actually.
Yeah, and when I hear your reflection there, Tish, the big message that's screaming at me is that self-determination and First Nations-led decision-making in seeing climate justice is critical. And what does that actually look like in practice? How can we see more of that?
Well, each action, it could be very different to many different communities. Self-determination, for what I saw in our communities and island communities was, the power to be able to make decisions and have free, prior, and informed consent, essentially, in making those decisions that impact our lives today and tomorrow, that uses the lessons of yesterday, as well as the ancient and traditional knowledge and wisdom and expertise. It's about having the power and agency, to veto rights from extraction, whether that's resources on land or in the ocean. And it's, the power to be able to practice culture and remain on your homelands without it being impacted by, fossil fuel extraction. Instead of having a sort of 15-minute consultation or sort of small meeting in community, but actually that we've had the agency to not just co-design, but lead in frameworks that respect our law, LORE, that because, we've seen it be taken away from us. That our knowledge and our rights and our practices weren't expert enough or experienced enough. And every time that, people think that, that happened back then, that it's stopped, it's actually still being played out today. I think in saying that, want to acknowledge my privilege as I'm here based on my mainland and based here on but, go often back to my island home. But even that in itself is sort of that, I'm fighting to protect my country so hard so that I can return back to continue to learn the stories, to continue to learn culture, like language, that, our communities right across the, country and world continue to revive, but practice and teach on to the next generation. And so to me, that's what self-determination is.
Yeah, and I guess I think of the risk of what gets lost if we don't get this right either, and that risk is real, and we have seen that play out in other places and spaces too. And there's so much to protect and so much that is so incredibly worthy of fighting for, that to see you get to choose to get to go home at some point, and that there is a home to go to.
Yeah. Yes.
first and foremost.
Yes, absolutely.
That there is enough island for that plane to land on.
Yes. Yes.
Because that's the reality. Like, that's what we're talking about, of that, sea levels rising means that islands are getting smaller.
Yes. And, about a month ago, was able to host, the Honourable Dr. Mina Talia, the Minister for Home Affairs and the Environment and Climate Change for the Tuvaluan government. And to really sort of hear his mana and, seeing them in real time, genuinely see their home being lost. That is definitely been the spirit and my why to, being the best daughter that I can do for, and serve to Masig and, continue to honor that.
Which I guess is where Just Futures Collab comes in, hey, of what the next step of that journey has looked like for you. So can you tell us all about Just Futures Collab, Tish? What have you been working on for the last little bit? And what gap have you addressed here? It's a big one.
How long do we have? Okay, so I think to share out with everyone, Just Futures Collab is pooling resources to accelerate action on climate justice. And so, we're working together with everyday folks and like-minded partners to sort of redirect those resources in a way that sort of alleviates some of the barriers that we have traditionally seen in these structures for accessing resources. As we continue to see this rise of sort of right-winged politics and sort of issues that they're sort of amplifying, we know that there's a gap of resourcing those communities to speak up. And so within our fight for First Nations justice and climate justice in this country, I'm not the only one doing it. There's so many other people out there. But redirecting resources and decolonizing wealth is one way to do it. And so we know that when we can resource our communities, we can give the power and agency to communities to make decisions that best work well for their, for country and culture. We know that there's a lot of money being hoarded. We know that the people that are making the decisions of where those resources are going to are also the same people that perhaps have never been to community. And we also know that the infrastructure legally for, charities in this country has barriers to the statuses required to allow more flow and where we can access money from.
Because it's actually super complex.
Oh my gosh,
it's
so
a
many
whole
layers.
thing.
Talk about polycrisis. That in itself is a polycrisis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when we go back to that bit of the island communities of bearing the absolute brunt of the impacts of climate change right now, but are receiving the least amount of funding to resource adaptation and self-determination in seeing what those solutions best be on the ground. Like, that doesn't, those math stats do not line up for me.
Do not line up. And people say that.
And I'm not great at math.
Yes.
But I know that's not right.
Me too. But no, it is not right. And you hit the nail on the head with that one. I mean, I want to sort of perhaps give context of maybe but how I got here to Just Futures Collab, everyone. I had the real extreme privilege and honor to serve Masig in a different way through a climate campaign being led by 8 Torres Strait Island people called Our Islands Are Home, in which, Clothing the Gaps has had the privilege to sort of work together and learn together in a really beautiful way and strengthen relationships on mainland. One of the big pillars of that was a litigation case with partners in GBK, our PBC in the Torres Strait Islands, local people, and our incredible lawyers, Client Earth, based in the UK. The 8 Torres Strait claimants took their voices to the United Nations Human Rights Committee and accused the Australian government then for violating their human rights by not taking action on climate policies in line with 1.5 degrees, which is a very powerful saying that has come from and been led by the Pacific Island nations, 1.5 to stay alive. One of the outcomes was that Australian government was in fact violating our human rights. Australia was the first developed nation, and if you hear me correctly, developed nation that had to pay loss and damage. And it set precedent for all Indigenous people globally, which has been able to support incredible campaigns like the Pacific Island Students Fight Climate Change at the ICJAO. When that announcement came in September 2022, we saw in the sort of budget release in October, there was about millions of dollars, perhaps maybe billions, going into fracking on the Beetaloo Basin. And as a response to the outcome from the United Nations Human Rights Committee, the Australian government then, which was different to where the original case had started from, gave about $1 million for a climate change center for excellence. I don't know.
Again, the math is not mathing, nor is the valuing of both of those things happening in the same budget at the same time, with one getting substantially more funding than the other.
Yes.
The other being climate change.
One
climate
to
justice.
destroy country and then limited resources to adapt. One of the sort of solutions that communities came sort of collectively decided in the Torres Strait Islands was, while a Band-Aid solution, it was a solution to be able to adapt enough to inform and have the conversations they needed to in their own communities about what would life look like if we were to relocate. And that Band-Aid solution was seawalls. And so a lot of the work that I had been sort of supporting was advocating to increase infrastructure for seawalls. And you had seen the wall or lack of, or the impacts of what was there on our island community.
Yeah.
And so in climate conferences like the UNFCCC, which a lot of people perhaps have heard about because Australia was really unsuccessful in the bin with co-hosting this year's upcoming UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. In those sort of platforms, there are policies that sort of perhaps dictate domestically what we will do in our region and in our country. Do they always do it? No. And that's why they perhaps may not ratify it, because it's about accountability. Over the last few years, we've seen one of those mechanisms being operationalized, which is climate finance and climate finance mechanism funds. And really exciting. And it's not to toot their horn, but Australia has jumped back into giving money to one of those green climate funds.
Good.
It is good because it obviously came with, they know the responsibility as a developed nation and a superpower of, fossil fuels.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, Australia for a very long time as a developed nation was not funding any climate financing. Right?
No, it wasn't. And that was when the current party came in and they rejoined.
Okay.
And so I think I just diplomatically say that because it's obviously different parties. And we know that sometimes it's, yes, we're bipartisanship here. But we know systems need to change. And so we knew, from all of that was about actually, that's great. But, we know that there needs to be, there's trillions of dollars of damage. And right now we need billions, and developed nations are only putting millions. This goes back to
the math ain't mathin'. The M's, the T's and the B's are not where they're meant to be.
Exactly. So when that mechanism got operationalized, it's really great, but we know there's still a gap in that of, how much money's in there. The next challenge was actually who can access it. It was like, okay, we need to do something differently. But then one of those learning and unpacking more, one of those barriers is that if you are Indigenous, the only people that can actually access those resources are people in developing nations. So if you're Indigenous in a developed nation, you can't right now access the resources on an international scale. Well, that is on an international platform because they're prioritizing to developing nations, which that makes sense.
Theoretically makes perfect sense, right?
100%. But, there is this assumption that Indigenous people in rich nations like Australia are okay, but we know
And being taken care of.
exactly.
Supported.
But we know right across the many challenges that we see, and obviously the fight for what's that justice intersection is that's not the way. There are just so many people living below the poverty line. And, and as we continue to say, our resources taken away from us, our country being taken away from us, our stories being taken away from us, then we're fighting, grappling for, all those layers of what it comes to and the cost of it all. And then that's what the numbers aren't adding up.
Yeah.
Like you're saying there's these numbers here on this book, but we need those numbers to protect something that you keep taking away from. It was really hard then for being a Torres Strait Islander and seeing our incredible efforts and then coming back into our nation and seeing that we can't even access resources for adaptation methods and solutions like seawalls. And one of the barriers was that, there was infrastructure to create that, but COVID happened, cost of living crisis happened, Ukraine-Russian war broke out. So the cost of what we're seeing again right now happened earlier this decade.
Yeah.
Earlier on. And so we saw that sort of challenge for communities, which meant that a 700-meter seawall that was on our country to be built for adaptation turned to be a 100-meter one. And then it's now had indirect impacts of, reshaping country where we've got storm surges. That is just, it's really confronting, actually.
It's massive, Tish. And I think you share a really strong example of the impacts of things that are happening economically with the climate. They are felt first and foremost and hardest by the communities that are the most vulnerable in those as well. Which is why the work that you're doing is so important in rediverting those resources and making them accessible to people to actually get the things done that they need. And I can't stress the urgency that I'm hearing from you so much of these things have to happen and they need to happen now to protect country. And a huge part of the model that you work around is around trust, which I feel like when we talk a lot about decolonizing philanthropy and what that looks like of a giving model based on trust, that funding without those ridiculous and overly burdensome administrative elements to them. Why is talk us through what that changes for the work that you get to fund?
The ultimate goal is that honestly, we need to give money back to the people. And when I say give, people have been a part of paying the rent, supporting their local sort of community group, but the extraction that has happened for our resources has happened from stolen land, and then it has become stolen wealth. And so decolonizing wealth was about actually how do we shift from from what exists today that is still ongoing, and it is ongoing because, it's not that the system is broken, it's doing exactly what it's designed to do.
It's working quite well, actually.
Exactly. And so, for some people, decolonizing might mean taking things away from them. But really what I mean is about actually how can we apply a more social lens to the way that we give? And how can we shift our practices in a way that sort of brings Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander or Indigenous sort of, cultural, culture of being and doing into the practices that we are, which are relational. I understand that in order for trust, we need those relationships. And so it was about then how can we do that together? I understand that perhaps, or what I'm seeing to understand, and that you might have risk on your capital, but also what is capital to you? There's social capital, there's cultural capital, there's community capital, there's human capital. And so it was then trying to shift a lens in a way that of how can we come into this together with shared values? And so we know that we need to just hand the money over, but people aren't there yet. And that's the gap. But in order for people to get there, what are some steps that we can do together? So I want to say I'm not the only group that are doing this incredible trust-based philanthropy. There are so many deadly groups that are out there, like, Spinifex Foundation over in South Australia, First Nations Futures, that are being led and valued led from our cultural ways. And so one of the gaps, though, that I have challenged with it, that I've seen within this critical decade, is that we know we need to scale up funding and resources advocacy, but people are just still on their journey of how to get there. And so having sort of alleviating and having a standard process still, so that they feel confident to see that, we're building the trust of decision making and power by having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island and Indigenous-led people, being the decision makers of that, and giving the agency of actually. They know where how to be the most strategic of what's happening on country.
Absolutely.
They know that what's happening there in the Kimberleys is going to impact the islands and the Torres Strait Islands. That we know what's happening on the Beetaloo Bay, since it's being fed through country all the way up to the Middle Arm Project on Larrakia country up north. We know that the fight for land rights and land back is nothing new. And that it's all for the benefit of others and not for our communities. And so it's about how can we have more agency, self-determination. And I think that's a big part of Just Futures Collab Surrey Change. If we fund decision-making for, cultural sovereignty, for, our land and our environment. And then we can, steward the way people have that agency to make decisions about where that goes to and invest into country. And then we know when we fund that has lasting indirect impacts that, creates jobs for our communities, better health pathways for our communities, better connections to country with our communities.
I feel like every dollar invested back into community is working 15,000 times harder in every way possible than invested elsewhere.
Right now, there's a really narrow window of funding that goes to the environment in this country. There's even a smaller narrow window of advocacy. And then a smaller portion of that goes to Indigenous people. And so when we see that our systems need to change and advocacy is how you do it, how do we create Indigenous-led, Black-led, First Nations-led vehicles that are using more culturally appropriate ways to help alleviate those barriers and work together that doesn't remove you away from community, but actually understand the needs for those communities that may be different.
Oh, Tish, it makes me so excited that the work that you're doing. Oh,
I'm really yelling at this microphone. I'm sorry.
You can feel the commitment that you have to seeing this grow. So tell me, Tish, in the future of Just Futures Collab, what's coming? What can we expect to see?
Wow. I mean, we're literally a small little, planting a coconut into the ground. And, what we can, see is sort of some of that sort of grounding work start creating fruits for our communities to drink. And so since launching our website, which is, we haven't done a lot out there, but we've been able to build a small community of regular givers where after Easter, nourishing grants of $1,000 straight into the geographical area of the Torres Strait Islands where people are bearing the brunt of those climate impacts. They may be small, but this is where the trust starts. And this is just from, everyday folks, whether you're a single mom and just want to go home and watch maths and drink some wine, or whether you're a nurse, just, in community helping. You have a powerful role to play by, pooling these really small contributions. And it's about that, that these contributions are making really big impacts in far remote areas. And so that's what's really exciting. So stay tuned. Also join the circle and become a part of the family. I feel really honored to be, another Torres Strait Islander, sort of leading some work to sort of create change from the ground up and work together collaboratively with people that are on their journey and how we can scale up these resources in a meaningful way. Doing some work around NAIDOC Week here on NAM, working with sort of local partners, and which is really exciting that will be accessible for all people. But just continuing these important conversations so that we can continue to, shift the Overton window. And we've been having obviously popcorning some thoughts about daring to be grey in a way that sort of casts a net bigger for everyone to bring in. But I think about, we often have learnt the lesson, that golden rule of treat others how you want to be treated. But I think we also need to decolonize that and think about how let's just treat others how they want to be treated. Because, they're leading.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that know what's going on.
100%. And Tish, I'm just so grateful that we have you here launching this, the Just Futures Collab project recently, to be that link between, as you said, like everyday regular people living on mainland who want to be able to see their generosity go exactly where it needs to be. And I think one of the things that when I think about like donations and giving, of people often think the word philanthropy is only applicable or accessible to, multi-squillionaires who have, 7 different family trust funds and all their kids manage them, and that's who does philanthropy. Like, the thing that I get really excited about is when we activate everyday generosity of, as you said, like whether it's $5 a week, whether it's $5 a month, whatever that is that feels and is accessible for anybody, like the impact that it has when it goes directly to where it needs to be. Like, everyday people have got the opportunity to get involved and to see those resources do that hard work on the ground, which I think is awesome. And another way of injecting that straight into First Nations led projects, I'm here for it.
100%. And I think that's one thing that what I really see, that in the face of adversity, it's actually like everyday folks come together.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what shape, size, color, faith you are, you'll help your neighbor. And I just think I think that's really proud to feel about being in this country. And so I know that we can do this, and I know it's going to come from the people.
Absolutely. And Tish, I remember when we first became connected through, as you said before, the work of Our Islands, Our Home, which we are also really proud to have as a community partner at Closing the Gaps. I remember thinking, like, I live on the mainland, I drive a car, I consume resources, I benefit from all of these things. Like, we have to be doing more. I have to be doing more, because the choices that I make in my mainland everyday life are the choices that are directly either harming or helping or healing. What we do matters, and it impacts the islands around us enormously. Tish, thank you so much. Firstly, for taking us to Masig at the start of our chat this morning. I am so grateful to have mentally gone there with you today. Thank you for the work that you're doing and the role that you're playing in agitating and activating and building community in this space, and being so generous with your thoughts and reflections, your knowledge, your cultural knowledge as well this morning. I've loved our chat, and yeah, it has been such a pleasure. And I really encourage people to go and check out Just Futures Collab and get involved, follow along, see what's happening. And I can't wait to see these micro grants go out and hear about all of the incredible things that I know are going to happen with those.
Thank you so much. Mina Ossa, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Oh, team, thanks so much for joining, and thanks so much for listening in to today's episode of Community Conversations. If something from today's episode stayed with you, we hope it starts a conversation where you are. Thanks for listening.